Thank you so much for that, Faith. That was awesome. How can that film not put you in a good mood? My friend, I don't know if Felix is on here or not, but we watch it every time before we run because it's the best inspiration. So I'm gonna let Faith talk a little bit about the film before we get into intros and the actual panel discussion.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. It's exciting to be able to be here in conversation about the film with everyone. And I believe we will have our directors, Chelsea Jolly and Whit Hassett should be joining too. And I think as you're going through, if you have questions later on too, you could potentially direct some of them to them. It's so interesting because you start out with the idea of like, I'm going to make this film. And then you are out there and you kind of like end up with a totally different film and a kind of different story. So we started out really trying to do something about the national monuments, feeling like this was something that was changing and it was a right now moment. And for me, I now live in Portland, Oregon, but I was basically talking back to friends of mine in New York being like, can you believe they're rolling back the monuments and this and that and the third is happening? And they were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh yeah, like my whole life changed when I moved out here. And yet what I kind of saw was so many of our communities are just getting to be in some of these places, just getting to have the access, whether it's, finally having the luxury of time, finally having the luxury of funds, finally having the luxury of like geographic ability to get to these places. And before we even get there, they're getting rolled back. And so I kind of felt like, how do we raise awareness about these places so that if people want to, they know that they can weigh in, not only on public lands as a whole, but also on what does the green space in my neighborhood look like? And so that's kind of where the film came from. And I mentioned we had an all-lady film crew, which was really exciting behind the scenes. Yeah, I think, I can leave it at that and we'll jump into it. And Jolena is going to introduce everyone. I think one of the things that's been very exciting is I think the kind of like you as you at the end of the film really is what it's about. It's like all of us kind of being involved with the outdoors or the green spaces or conservation, whatever the words that we want to use in our own way. And so that's also why I'm so excited that we get to have so many amazing panelists talking about the film. So it's not just, oh, you have to run 150 miles in order to like have this conversation, because that's like so not the point. So yeah, I'm just happy and thank you.
Thanks for that, Faith. So yeah, a little introduction for everyone. So Faith, you know her now, producer and subject of This Land, documentary film producer and outdoor enthusiast with a focus on diversity and representation. We're gonna put all the panelists' websites in the chat after these intros. Kriste Peoples, I should say pronouns, she, her. Kriste is a Denver-based writer, trail running coach, and meditation teacher whose work in the field of equity and inclusion in nature serves to connect underrepresented communities to new, empowering narratives of wellness. And Parker McMullen Bushman, also she, her. Parker McMullen Bushman is the Vice President for Community Programs, Education, and Inclusion at the Butterfly Pavilion in Westminster, Colorado. She is also the founder of an online resource called Eco-Inclusive and Earth Queen, a project dedicated to disrupting the narrative that only white able-bodied people care about the environment and participate in outdoor recreation activities. Cool. So we're gonna jump into our first question. And I just chose random order. We're gonna start with Faith for this question and then go to Kriste and Parker. So how have your perceptions of conservation or a conservationist changed throughout your personal and or your professional lives?
Yeah, definitely. I used to work at Discovery Channel in New York, and I remember like during the interview, people basically asking me, because I was, my department was doing an environmental program, like, how do you feel about conservation? I was like, yeah, I think that's for like privileged people that have time to think more about plants and animals than people. And they were just like, what? And I was like, sorry, I was like, I'm not gonna get this job. But then during the process of really being able to see all of the stories that were coming in, and what we were able to support and then what we weren't able to support, was when I was like, oh, hold on, we're actually all related. And these people's stories are planet stories and vice versa. So that really helped me a lot. I think it wasn't still until I was living out in Oregon and starting to travel and being able to kind of be in more places than I even really desired to be when I was in New York. So I was like, why would I leave Brooklyn? Like, that's silly. Ever. Right, because you're like, why would I ever leave Brooklyn? But yeah, I think when I started doing that work, I was like, hold on, conservation sounds so over there, and yet these are conversations about clean air, clean water, and access to green spaces. So in that sense, sure, I'm a conservationist. Like, this is absolutely a conversation that I can, will, and like want to be involved in. So for me, it kind of took a degree of breaking down the pre-existing frame, I would say. Yeah.
Parker?
Yeah, go ahead, Kriste.
So in my own experience, I have recently been taken back to reflecting on my childhood days and the fact that we were conservationists of a sort without even realizing it. Because as Faith said, you know, we don't have time to be thinking about all this stuff out there, but thinking more about our immediate needs. And that is, don't run water all day long. Be really mindful of how much you're using, how much you're consuming, because once it runs out, we don't have it anymore, you know? And then there was always, in my family and families of lots of folks I know, grandma had a garden. Our parents knew something about raising food or tending the earth in some way or another. And there was always an importance on getting fresh food and being mindful of like how much we're wasting and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of refer to that as little c conservation, because in terms of the bigger industry of conservation, all I saw was, you know, Greenpeace or white people in the Pacific South, in the Pacific Northwest, watching the whales and making sure that, you know, they didn't get trapped in the garbage of the seas and stuff. And that had nothing to do with me as far as I was concerned, as far as I knew. But today, when I think about so much of what I grew up with, being appreciative of recycling and upcycling, you know, changing the use of clothes that are worn out, turn them into rugs, turn them into rags to clean your place, use baking soda to clean. Like, don't waste, be mindful of what you're putting in the earth and in your body. That's huge. And so I think this means, to me, coming to an expansion in terms of what the conservation conversation is, because that can really make us aware and more receptive to what's happening in the larger conversations that we've been largely shut out from.
And I think my experiences are so similar to what both Faith and Kriste talked about. You know, as a child, I had that vision of who cared about the outdoors, who loved the outdoors, who was active in the outdoors. And that vision didn't really include people that looked like me, because the narrative, those weren't the narratives I was being shown. And even, you know, so much so that even as a small child at 8 or 9, I remember my mom took us fishing for the first time. We were living in the Bronx, and she figured out where we were going, where we could get the supplies, how we would get there for the day. And she brought a friend of hers along who was a white woman that she worked with. And we went out on the boat for the day. It was amazing. I had so much fun in this connection to nature and the outdoors. But at the end of the day, I remember turning to my mom's white friend and saying, I wish I was white so I could do things like this all of the time. And so even at that young age, my mom had planned the trip. You know, my mom was a farm girl from Charleston, South Carolina, but even at that young age, I had that built into my mind. And going to the marina, even it was all white people, you know, people who were out there. My mom had saved her pennies to get us entry into that space. And I looked around and was reinforced that, you know, I felt I was only able to be there because of this white woman. And so I think about the narratives that get built up in our heads, the narratives that get reinforced by things that we see on television and through other advertising, and even the stories that we tell one another. And I see the people in my life as a child that really did love the outdoors. Like Kriste said, you know, my grandmother was out there in her garden. She reused her Tupperware. My uncle rode his bike 20 miles each way to work every day, right? Because he didn't have a vehicle. And my dad picked up all of these cans to return them, right, for the money, but he would walk for miles picking up cans on the side of the road. And those people were conservationists. And I think one of the most important things that we can do moving forward is, how do we tell those stories too, right? How do we build that narrative that is so inclusive of the things that people are already doing, so that they can feel like I belong here too.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a big theme here is just the narrative and how it's harmful right now and how it needs to be shifted around conservation and the outdoors in general. And so I think that kind of leads into how a lot of major NGOs have failed to hire a staff that have even 2 in 10 people being people of color. And I want to talk a little bit about how these narratives cause that harmful circumstance in workplaces, and then also just how your work specifically, or what do you think, why do you think it's the case? I guess we discussed the narrative, but then also what do you think needs to change in the mainstream environmental narrative, and what do you think we could, what would it look like if we truly, organizations and individuals truly did embrace equity and inclusion? And start with Parker for this one.
Yeah. So, you know, that narrative shift, I think is one of the most important things. When we think about, when people go into organizations, right? Folks say, we want to include people of color, we want to include people from marginalized identities, but we want them to fit into the narrative that we currently have. And so if you know, come into an environmental organization, but you dress a certain way, you have certain views, maybe your push for environmentalism stems from your experiences with environmental justice, and you have that lens. Sometimes those things don't always fit into the overall narrative. And so, like, the Queen and Earth Queen stands for Keep Widening Environmental Engagement Narratives, because I feel like it is so important that organizations realize that the way we have set up how we do business now, how we do conservation now, that way was set up under one lens. And until we are able to stop being the melting pot, I love to use that visual, like America is a melting pot, but our organizations, those environmental organizations, are a melting pot. We want everyone to come in, melt down, take on the same flavor of the same environmentalism that we've been doing for the past, 50, 60, whatever years. And we need it to be more like a salad bowl, where people come in and everyone's able to maintain their unique flavor, maintain what really drives them within this conversation, and that all of those different things, environmental justice, climate change, all of these different things fit together, and they help to make something that is really delicious and complements each other. But when people come in and we're like, no, you got to be our flavor or no flavor, or you're not really a part of this movement, that's when we don't keep people engaged.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna go next to Faith for this question.
Yeah, I mean, I love the salad bowl and melting pot analogy too, for sure. And I do think that, you know, I feel like so big and longstanding environmental organizations are trying to make the change now, and really some have been doing it for a while and basically trying to figure out how. And I definitely get a lot of times, sometimes like, you know, in the DMs, people are like, I want to do this thing. How do I, you know, create a new thing in my town where I'm this? And I'm like, find out who's already doing that work. Because the difference with like little C conservation, which I also love from Kriste, is people are out there doing that work under different names. And so power sharing allows established organizations to share the power with other people who are already doing this work, but it might be called something different. And so expanding the narrative also includes expanding the kind of programming that's being offered by these larger groups. So if the activities are, you know, mountain climbing and hiking, and those are the only two ways to maybe do something that's social with an organization, and then there's this kind of meeting and this kind of meeting, and if you look at the people who are speaking and you haven't heard of them, or the topics that are happening and they don't seem to be relevant to you, it's like, how do you support the groups that are already doing this kind of work? And that's why with the film, like if you look at our website, which is thislanddoc.com, we separated into like play, learn, and take action. And we've been trying to, you know, so if you guys have a group you want us to share, throw it in the chat, where we've been adding, we're gonna send it to Jolena, but we've been trying to say, hey, if you want to get out with someone, here are people that you can get out with, and here are resources where you can learn more, and here are you know, potential things. We're working on the action part still, because I'm not a policy wonk, but need help with that. But just, you know, I think one of the big things that these groups can do is support what is already happening, and look around the room. And if someone isn't in that room and you have power, it's your job to figure out why and what you as an organization can do to bring people into the room. And I've had, you know, I've been the guest at a offsite where I'm the only one that's not like, you know, a pro this or pro that, because they said, hey, we appreciate you, we appreciate your time, can you come and just give us your insight, you know? And it doesn't mean every brown person in your office wants to give you their DEI insight. It needs to be a chosen thing that needs to be work that they choose and want to do. But I think it is, it's a big question of how do we share power in ways that support work already being done, like you said. So it's like, you don't have to come do it our way. We can come do it your way. Yeah.
You know, I also feel like doing it from where you are, just to tack on to what you just said, Faith, too, is like not having to be an expert, but also being in your own lane. Like Faith created this beautiful experience for all of us, carrying us in through your jam, which is trail running. And we happen to learn about all these other things along the way. I think that's so important, to really work from individually, to work from our point of passion or our interests or our strengths, in order to really open up that access to what conservation is and how can I fit, how does this fit into what I do? From my own experience, being out on the trails with people, it really instills a wider sense of our responsibility for being good stewards of the earth, right? And what you shared, Faith, in the film, you said being a public landowner gives you a greater sense of responsibility. And I thought about that and I said, holy shit, I am a public landowner. I mean, that just infused me with a sense of pride just right there. And the other point that I want to make too is that corporations are not people, right? And so people are running these organizations. We can't just say, oh, this big pharma or this other, whatever the company is, isn't doing such and such. Again, what is the leadership looking at? What are their objectives? And so I find in places that I have worked, if the leadership is not truly interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, without it being the responsibility of those people of color and the marginalized, representatives, then the company is going nowhere. They're not going to do anything. They'll invite some contractor to come in, give a brilliant workshop or a so-so seminar, and then that's the end of it. They've ticked a box and they're done. I think it's really important for us to look first individually and independently. Okay, what are my priorities? How is this impacting me? What can I contribute to the conversation? And how can I hold these people in power responsible to do more from where they are with what they have? So that we all share some responsibility and we're not just looking to the big conservation industry, the capital C conservationists, to do it all for us.
Thank you for sharing. And this actually leads really well into a question I see in the chat from Joe. So we were going to wait till the end for Q&A, but since this is so relevant, I kind of want to ask this for you guys now. It says, sometimes I struggle to imagine that these long-standing white-led organizations really can change fundamentally. And if my efforts should go toward trying to change them from within or as a consultant, versus just trying to start our own POC-led organizations founded on decolonized values and forget about them. Transformation versus stepping out and creating new. I think it's a both and, but interested in your perspective and experiences on this question. So whoever wants to answer that first, I think it's a great question.
This really speaks to me so much, and I think it is a both and, right? Because there's work that we have to do now, and there's work that has to be done for the long term. And we know that our society is rapidly changing. Demographics are rapidly changing. And so we want to, I think a part of decolonizing, a part of building something new is maybe doing something that's never been done before, which is truly creating something that includes all people. And a part of that is, bringing along some people that, traditionally didn't include all people. So you provide that space, but no one's going to force them, right? We're not going to drag them along kicking and screaming. They have to be able to see the benefit in this work. I had a friend that shared a quote with me, and it said, I'm a brick in the house that's being built around your house. Right. And what it makes me think of is, like, we have organizations now that's that house in the middle, right? And they think they've got it together, they've got the monopoly on things. But as our society changes, people of color, people from marginalized identities are building their own thing. And so many times people think if they're not a part of our thing, we only see white people in our conservation movement, but that's because other groups aren't doing things. And that's not the case. People are building their own house around your house. And unless you dismantle your house and add your bricks to our house, you are going to be totally enveloped, and then you're going to die because you're not going to have sunlight. You're not going to have all the things that are needed to feed your organization. So you can start to dismantle the way you've done things and add it to this amazing house that we are building together, or you can get smothered out. Sorry, but I don't know if that is too harsh of a way to put it.
Yeah, I think, I think about the same thing, and it's, I I think it is a yes. It's a yes, and yes, we do need. So if we're recognizing this fact that historically the pre-existing organizations and the way that they've done things haven't been welcoming for so many people, how far we have to go to make that really welcoming is so far. And for some people, and I say for myself, like I'm very used to navigating historically white spaces. And so for me, the degree of comfort it's gonna take is a lot less because I don't have to code switch as much, or code switching is so much a part of my daily existence that I know how to be listened to and respected in certain spaces at this point. But when I bring, someone else in with me, the microaggressions and everything they're going to take is going to be so much. They might be like, yo, I'm never going back there with you. And so to me, that's why all those spaces need to exist, because the work in some of these historic spaces is so much. It's so much that has to be done that it's really not fair to bring your people into some of those places when they're not ready to be welcoming to them. And that is why I think our spaces need to exist too. And I would say, just like Parker's saying, as much as I'm like, this is not about replacement. And I think there's a lot of fear with longstanding organizations or the leadership in them about being replaced. And that when we say something like John Muir was racist, people freak out and they're like, oh my God, like you're trying to, ruin my heroes and you don't respect this narrative, all that stuff. And it's like, listen, John Muir was racist. So I'm not going to drink out of a coffee cup that has a quote on him in it. And if that's what your organization is making, then no, like I'm not going to be down with that. And so I think it's, yes, we're not trying to replace these folks or erase the legacy of all of what they've done, because it's opened the door for us to also call ourselves conservationists and figure out what that means. But it's those groups really need to work together, or as Parker said, you're going to be left behind, because that's the other thing. I'm like, we're doing this work regardless, and all the organizations that we have listed, we're supporting each other, we're creating coalitions together. And so it's so important. Basically, I think it's a scarcity mentality. It's like, do you want these people working here and those people working there, or those people working there, or are we going to be stronger together? And most of us know that we're going to be stronger together. So we really need to work together, and also respect the fact that every space is going to need to look different for people to feel comfortable and welcome. And, one of the things we try to do in the film is show that there's historic reason for that. There's a historic reason why we still don't feel comfortable in some spaces. It's not, at this point, you can't gaslight us. Like, we know that those are unhealthy spaces. So I definitely think it's a yes, and that creating our own coalitions so that we can work better together and feel confident in the work that we're doing and feel backed up in the work that we're doing and how our people around us is going to make us better co-collaborators too.
I think part of that yes and is also not throwing John Muir entirely out. Like, if John Muir is these people's hero, and some people feel really guilty about that. Oh my God, I can't even look at him anymore now because you've said all these things, you've opened my eyes. What do I do now? My 2 cents right there is to look very closely and soberly at John Muir. Yes, there was a lot of racism, and he was a man of his time, and all his other homies that were doing the same thing, thinking of indigenous, Black, marginalized people as less than human. Yes, that was a big part of what they did and who they were. And so really having a clear-eyed view of these people will help them, I think, really turn the tide on business as usual and say, hey, okay, there are a lot of imperfections here, and this is what we need to be doing, because now that we have new information, we can do a little better or a lot better. The other thing that came up too, in this wonderful analogy of building the house around the other house, that concerns me is that we have to take care of ourselves in the building, because we don't want to burn ourselves out. It's a wonderful It's a wonderful moment that we're in right now. We're not asking for permission to be part of these larger organizations that have shunned us or have just thrown a few crumbs across the table for us to scramble and fight for among ourselves, which is also its own kind of struggle that that I see us taking on in some circles. You know, with a lot of the opening in this area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think there's a lot of reactionary kind of posturing in different ways where people, oh, I know, okay, you're saying the wrong language, now you're out, or you're not doing this, so you're no longer on our team, you're anti whatever. I think we all got to look at, again, what are our needs here? What are our goals? How can we work in a way where we don't victimize ourselves in the building of this new house? How can we really work in a decolonized way so that we're not just extending the patriarchy and the racism and all the other stuff that just takes on a little bit of a different flavor once we start to, you know, create our own organizations and stuff. I think that's really important for us to bear in mind because, you know, the work that we're doing is really important and it need not look like a different shade of the same old stuff.
Because that's the big fear, right? That the fear is that when we start talking about privilege, right, and granting privilege to everyone, the fear is that if you are taking something away from someone, that you are going to oppress them, that you are putting them down. And that's not what this is about. Like we don't want you to not have what you've had. We want to, for everyone to be able to experience that, right? We want everyone to be a part of that. And that's how we build this very inclusive movement, not by tearing others down or shifting the oppression model, right? We're not about shifting the oppression model. We want to tear down that oppression model altogether.
Thank you all for sharing on that. So on this line of colonized history of conservation and the history of oppression within this movement, Diane asks, how do we begin decolonizing the conversations around conservation efforts? And I guess what does that mean to decolonize conservation to you all? And again, if someone wants to speak on this first, just go ahead.
Well, and the other question about, you know, as a white young female professional in conservation, I sometimes struggle to figure out how they get involved versus how they get out of the way. I think those questions kind of go well together. And I love seeing people answering each other's questions in the chat. That's so dope. I'm like, okay, Marley's pointing out something that Parker's already written on that. And I think one way to start decolonizing spaces is to really look at the narratives that you are empowering, that you are using as your examples. Who are you bringing into the room? You know, when there's a decision that needs to be made and you have some of that decision-making power, are we going with the same people that we know? Are we saying, I couldn't find anyone? Or are we really like doing the work to, you know, find people who you can support or bring in someone that isn't like a friend of the org and we love so-and-so and we always work with them because they're a friend of the org. Like I think you can share power by supporting new, you know, or I wouldn't say new because I hate this like newness, like now we've been here, it's not new. But I think also there's this idea of, you know, who else isn't being heard in the room? And are you noticing that every time Kriste has an idea, they don't hear it, but then when I say it, everyone hears it? Well, you know, maybe you need to just be saying the simple thing like, and Kriste had this, Kriste, could you say that point again? And it's just simple things like that and in meetings and things where I think you can help bring those things in. But I love the keep widening narratives. I think that's Parker's gonna have some stuff to say too.
Well, it's also about the way that we look at the original story, right? Because we, if you think about organizations And some of our really big conservation organizations have very deep roots, right? They're a tree with very deep roots, and the fruit that they're giving off is they want to change the fruit. They want to change the fruit without looking at the roots. And that's not possible. Like, you have to look at the root of your organization and say, how did we get here? What are the seeds that grew what we currently are dealing with now? And it's interesting because a big part of that story is looking at how other trees have grown. And we don't do that. We feel like we are stuck in this model. And if you look at, indigenous cultures, if you look at other Black and brown cultures, if you look at other groups, they had traditional ways of dealing with the environment, with things that are not being recognized now. And some of our answers are there, right? But we're so stuck in what we have currently grown that we're not willing to chop down the tree or regrown, or even do a little bit of root cutting and grafting. Like, we're not willing to do that. And that is a part of that decolonizing, right? We have to look at the way things have been done before and be willing to make changes. Because if you keep trying to grow pecans out of a peach tree, it's just not gonna happen. So that's what I gotta say.
And if it does happen, your science is pretty bad. We should really be worried. I had a great privilege of speaking with LaDonna Bravebo Allard a couple of years ago. And she is the woman who opened up her land so that people could come and protest and camp there during the big pipeline situation. And she said, one of the resources that we're overlooking is our elders. And so, speaking to, indigenous tradition, she said, we need to go in and learn their stories and hear what they have to say about what's going on now, and in terms of the conservation conversation, we overlook each other and our cultures and what our own elders know and knew as natural resources of a sort, because they really are. And I think the more that we're able to really embrace what we know rather than overlooking it because, big corporations don't identify that as something that's useful. Okay, if I just, pick up garbage along the riverbank, or if I, don't waste my resources, they're not really looking at that as an important part of the contribution. But when we can really turn our lens on the cumulative impact that all of us have been contributing to the act of saving our resources and really caring for the land, I think that is going to help us really find a new way forward as those narratives start to inform and break apart these really old, crusty conversations that have been held, decades and centuries ago.
I see a question that might be good for right now from Fana. It says, as a woman of color, how do you go about navigating and working in white spaces while trying to also protect your emotional and mental health? Does anyone want to take that one on?
It's difficult, I found though that the more I was able to be truly myself, the code switching, it wears you down. And sometimes you have to, like, if you want to survive in these spaces. And I think that is what is the most difficult. But the more that I kind of let some of it go and tried real, like, I'm going to show up in the executive boardroom with my head wrap. right? And I'm just gonna do it. And the first time I sweated bullets, right? But I did it. And so it's like that fine line that helped me to unbuckle my pants and let relax a little bit. But it's not perfect because not everyone has that ability, right? That also came with a little bit of power, which gave me privilege in my life to say I'm at this level and I can do that. And so I know there's no easy answer for that.
You know, I will say, you know, at a job that I had once, they would say, you know, bring your full self to work. We want all of you here. And I'm like, you ain't ready for me to bring my full self. So don't even come at me with that. And interestingly enough, because I didn't communicate in the same way that everybody did, or I didn't tell everybody everything was going on that was going on in my life over the weekend and stuff, people didn't know how to take me. And interestingly enough, on my annual reviews, nobody had a problem with the level of work I was doing or my contribution to the company. But they said, well, you know, Kriste, people really want to know you. Why are you holding back? And that nobody was saying anything. Nobody was saying anything about the fact that there was no psychological safety for me in that space. How can I come in and tell you that I am blown apart by the fact that there is this rash of police shootings and this brutality that is happening day after day after day, and none of y'all are upset by it? How can I come into a meeting and just fall apart in tears when nobody is giving me any room for that? And yet everybody's breaking down after Trump gets elected, you know, and crying in the hallways and stuff and collapsing onto me in tears and everything. And so, yes, it is difficult. And I'm like, why are y'all crying? It's Tuesday, you know, like, welcome. And so this goes to the point of self-care. Self-care is critical for us all. And particularly to be a person of color, a woman of color in a big, dominant culture organization, we need to really look for those tools that are going to support us when we have to have these difficult conversations or be in these spaces that we find challenging, and be rebuffed for not being like everybody else. Find out what your support system is. Sometimes, you know, for me, again, I go to the trails with my girlfriends and we run and we talk and we cry. I'll call people. Get your team together to support you. Find your tools. Rely on yourself as a resource while you're in the space, and know that what's being shown to you at this job doesn't determine who you actually are. I know that's more than a notion, as Parker said. It's hard to do, but it's critical if we want to maintain our sanity and sense of self in these spaces.
And I'll just add quickly to that: say no and get paid. These are things I'm still trying to teach myself, but you know, saying yes, and what's your budget for that? It's not the easiest thing to do, and it's not gonna make the work easier, but it might let you be like, and I need to get out of here this weekend, and I just got paid, so I can. Or you know what? That was a rough day. I'm gonna buy myself a nice dinner because I deserve it. And so you actually being able to value yourself. And then sometimes when the opportunity, that's another thing I was told this year, is like a lot of people are gonna offer you opportunities that are actually favors, and being able to look and see like, is this actually an opportunity for me? Or am I just like, is this just really painful, hard experience for me where I'm like pouring my guts out on the table? And for what purpose? Do people here actually want to do this work? Can I see that there's actually like efforts being done to do work here? Am I just going into this place to be a part of the dog and pony show and dance on your panel for you and then leave and nothing happens. And I've learned to start being like, you know what? No, I don't want to be a part of that. Thank you so much. And it's hard because you're like, oh, the opportunity, but sometimes it's not actually an opportunity.
Snaps to all of that. And I just want to ask, since I want to be respectful of people's time, but the conversation's also really great. So panelists, do you have, it's totally fine if not, would you have 10 more minutes to answer a couple of questions? Awesome. That's great. Okay. I see so many good ones. I'll just go in order. Leander asks, I wonder about diversity within diversity. We know that we all come with different values and backgrounds as people of color. How are we doing in the conservation spaces when there is disagreement, or are we doing what social scientists call herd mentality and just agreeing with each other on topics like environmental justice, equity, solutions? Disagreement can be part of the diversity narrative and is needed in order to thrive and think critically. So yeah, again, if any of you have thoughts on that.
I think my quick thing would be that I think it takes everyone and it takes everyone's approach. And so even though someone else's approach isn't necessarily my approach, I think I can still support the work that they're doing. And it takes a lot to say like, and that's not actually the role that I want to play right now. And so I think being really clear on how you want to do your work and how other people want to do their work and how you can support each other and support all that work, because it takes everyone. It's going to take every kind of action along the spectrum to move forward. So I think, yeah, that's just been my part, is like, okay, I see you over there. I'm gonna shout out to you, but I'm not gonna do it that way. And I'll do mine this way. And rather than being like, you're doing it wrong, more like, how can we support each other, offer like helpful criticism, share resources, but not spend all of our time tearing each other down, because that's not gonna move forward.
I think too, being respectful of where everybody is, what people are bringing to the conversation themselves, and also our understanding of like what true community is, that and true conversation and creating change, what that means. We're gonna have to look critically at what we've been thinking and how we've been operating. When we get into these spaces where everybody is coming to the table, we got to look at, okay, what have I internalized about myself, about what I think I can have, or what I think is of value in this conversation? How do I feel about this person coming to me with their same stuff, right? And all their baggage of decades and centuries and things. I think that in order to have a real sense of progress, we're going to have to be committed to the work, which means coming back to it again and again and doing the hard stuff, looking at the difficult aspects of what brought us here in the first place.
I think this concept of diversity within diversity is it's an important one, right? Because we do know we probably, a lot of us on this panel have heard people say, oh, well, this thing that I'm doing is sanctioned by my Black friend, or my, I know this person and they say I'm not racist. And so understanding that, there is diversity within diversity. There are different things that people think and feel about everything across the rainbow. I think, though, it's also important to know and acknowledge that there are some concepts that need a wealth of people behind them, right? And so, like, I think I've heard echoed with some other people coming together and saying that, this is a thing that we want to move forward because it's important for our community. It's important for the work that we're doing, I think, is also very, very important.
Thank you. Final question. This is from Hiba. She's a good friend. Hi, Hiba. Hello, I am a young woman just entering the world of conservation, ecology, activism, etc. Can you offer insights on what it means to be an earth person? How can I discover the language, have the right conversations, enter the right spaces to do the work, put ideologies of change into practice in my daily life? Thank you for your time.
Oh, can I just, what's striking me is the word right. I say ditch that word, because whatever you're doing that is coming from what's driving you, your concerns, your interests, your objectives, your goals, that can't be wrong. Keep following that. My feeling is when you come from that space, you are fine. You are going to draw to you the people who can help and support you along the way and help you grow your career and get the answers and action that you seek. Don't buy into what's right and wrong, because that's part of a lot of what has been shared today, the dismantling of a lot of these old stuffy ideas that have kind of been hardened into place and would have us believe this is right, the only right way to do it, that big capital C thing, you know, and again, like everybody's voice is needed, which means your unique perspective, your talents, your gift, your voice is needed just as it is right now. Stay true to that.
I love all of what Kriste just said, and just a resounding like your voice is needed, right? Whenever someone asks me, what do I wish I could have told myself as a young person starting out, it's that your voice is needed, is valued, and needs to be brought into this space, because I spent so much time doubting that, right? So I would say to you, whatever you're bringing, bring it. It's needed.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I want to have Kriste say that to me every morning. Um, and I would say, in addition, like, people have been putting so many great resources in the chat too. And for me, reading some of those books and some of those other voices has been so affirming. So I think reading them can help you just that much more root yourself in how you want to do your work and what moves you. And so I think those could be some really helpful things to just read those as you do the work that you're doing. But 100% on what Kriste and Parker just said.
Okay, I think we're out of time now, but I just want to thank the panelists again so much for joining us, for sharing these insights, sharing their knowledge. Seriously, I know everyone here is really grateful for them, and Leander wants to stay here forever. I do too, guys, but impossible. But thank you guys. And so we have contacts for Faith, Kriste, and Parker. And then Jim is state director of the Wilderness Society, my boss, so helped put this on. Gabriel is an organizer for the Wilderness Society, also helped, and he's super into the equity work that we do in that organization. So reach out to him too if you're curious about specific Wilderness Society work. And yeah, thank you to all the audience members. You've been awesome in the chat. It has been so energetic and kind and wonderful. So yeah, just big thanks. And this is important work, and we're doing the right things. We're having the right conversations. So
Thank you. And thank you, Jolena, for finding us and having us, and Jim and Gabriel for helping organize everything. We're so appreciative of the space and to be, in this conversation together. Thank you.
And Faith, thank you for a beautiful film and lots of insight and wisdom.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Mwah.
Thank you for being so amazing.